The council of elders gathered in the volcanic nest, their ancient scales gleaming like molten metal in the firelight. 12 dragons, each thousands of years old, circled the trembling hatchling with contempt in their amber eyes. "Pathetic," growled Mordrath, his obsidian horns scraping the cave ceiling. "Look at her wings, translucent as paper. She'll never survive her first flight." The newborn dragon, barely the size of a house cat, cowered against the stone wall. Her scales, instead of the brilliant crimson or gold of her kin, were a dull gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her name was Jassy, though none of the elders bothered to use it. "The bloodline is tainted," hissed Vexira, the eldest female. "We should cast her into the abyss now, before she wastes our resources." Jassy's mother, Seraphine, spread her wings protectively. "She is my daughter, give her time." "Time?" Mordrath's laugh echoed like thunder. "She cannot even produce flame, Seraphine. What use is a dragon who cannot breathe fire?" It was true. While other hatchlings her age could already summon sparks, Jassy could only cough out wisps of gray smoke. Her claws were dull, her teeth small, her roar more of a squeak. In a species that valued strength above all else, she was an embarrassment. "The vote is cast," Vexira declared. "The hatchling will be exiled to the human lands. Let the soft-skins deal with our failure." Seraphine's anguished cry shook the mountain, but dragon law was absolute. By dawn, Jassy found herself dumped in a forest clearing, miles from any dragon territory, left to survive or perish alone. Daniel trudged through the woods behind his grandmother's cottage, his backpack heavy with textbooks. At 17, he'd rather be anywhere else than spending his summer in the middle of nowhere, helping his elderly grandmother with her garden. But his parents had insisted. Grandma Miriam lived alone, and someone needed to check on her. He was lost in thought about the physics assignment due when school resumed when he heard it, a pitiful whimpering sound like a wounded animal. Daniel pushed through the undergrowth and froze. A small dragon, an actual dragon, lay huddled beneath an oak tree, shivering despite the warm afternoon. Her gray scales were covered in scratches and her ribs showed through her thin hide. When she noticed him, she tried to bare her teeth, but the gesture was more pitiful than threatening. "Holies," Daniel breathed. Dragons were real, actually real. The creature's eyes, pale silver, almost human in their expression, locked onto his. Daniel saw something in that gaze that made his chest tighten, not the fierce pride of a predator, but the desperate fear of something abandoned and alone. "Daniel, where are you, dear?" His grandmother's voice carried through the trees. The dragon flinched, trying to scramble away, but her injured leg gave out. "Here, Grandma," Daniel called, unable to take his eyes off the creature. "And you need to see this." Miriam appeared moments later, wiping her flower-covered hands on her apron. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with silver hair tied in a bun and eyes that crinkled at the corners from decades of smiling. When she saw the dragon, she didn't scream or run. She knelt down. "Oh, you poor little thing," Miriam cooed, approaching slowly. "What happened to you?" The dragon, Jassy, watched this tiny human with confusion. In her short life, she'd only known mockery and rejection. But this creature, this fragile being without scales or claws or fire, looked at her with something she'd never experienced before: compassion. Miriam turned to her grandson. "Daniel, run back to the house. Bring me the first aid kit, some blankets, and that leftover chicken from yesterday." "Grandma, that's a dragon. And she's hurt and frightened. Move along now." Something in his grandmother's tone brooked no argument. Daniel ran. When he returned, he found Miriam sitting cross-legged on the forest floor, the dragon's head resting cautiously in her lap. She was humming an old lullaby, stroking the creature's scales with weathered fingers. "Her name is Jassy," Miriam announced. "She told me. Dragons can talk. Not with words, but when you get to my age, you learn to listen with more than your ears." She accepted the supplies and began gently cleaning Jassy's wounds. "They threw her away, Daniel, her own kind, because she wasn't strong enough, wasn't fierce enough, wasn't enough of what they thought she should be." Jassy made a small sound, something between a whimper and a purr, as Miriam worked. "Well," the old woman said firmly, wrapping a bandage around Jassy's foreleg, "they were fools. Strength isn't everything, and sometimes the softest hearts are the bravest." Over the following weeks, something extraordinary happened. Miriam claimed Jassy as her own, setting up a corner of her barn with blankets and heat lamps. She fed the dragon chicken soup when she was sick, read her stories in the evening, and scolded her gently when she accidentally singed the curtains during her first successful flame attempt. Daniel, initially skeptical, found himself drawn to the odd pair. He watched his grandmother teach Jassy to trust again, to play, to believe that she had value beyond her ability to fight or breathe fire. And Jassy grew. Not in the way her dragon kin grew, massive and terrible. She remained small, no larger than a large dog even after months. But her gray scales began to shimmer with an iridescent quality, and her silver eyes glowed with intelligence and warmth. More importantly, she discovered her gift. One afternoon, Miriam collapsed in her garden. Daniel, panicking, called for help while Jassy pressed against his grandmother's chest. The dragon's scales began to glow softly, and that strange gray smoke, the smoke other dragons had mocked, flowed from her nostrils. Miriam's eyes fluttered open. "I'm all right, dear, just tired." But she shouldn't have been. Daniel had felt the absence of a pulse, had seen the gray pallor of her skin, yet now she was fine. They learned the truth over time. Jassy couldn't breathe fire like other dragons. Instead, she exhaled life itself, a healing magic so rare that even dragon legends barely mentioned it. Her small size wasn't weakness, it was efficiency. Her soft scales weren't vulnerability, they were sensitivity to the pain of others. The dragons had mocked her for being different. They cast out their greatest treasure. 5 years later, when the Dragon Council of Elders came seeking the legendary healer rumored to live among humans, a miracle worker who could cure any wound, any illness, they found her in a small cottage garden. Jassy, still small and gray, sat beside an old woman who was teaching her to knit. A young human man, now graduated from university, was building them a greenhouse. Mordrath landed in the clearing, his massive form blocking out the sun. "We have come for." He stopped. The weak hatchling they'd discarded looked up at him with those silver eyes, now filled not with fear but with quiet confidence. Miriam's hand rested on Jassy's head, and the message was clear: "She belongs to me now." "We were wrong," Fexira admitted, lowering her great head. "We seek your forgiveness and your aid. A plague ravages our kind." "No," Miriam said simply. The elders recoiled. A human dared refuse them. "You threw away a child because she didn't meet your standards," the old woman continued, her voice gentle but unyielding. "Jassy owes you nothing." Jassy nuzzled against her grandmother, making her choice clear. But then Daniel spoke up. "Grandma, remember what you taught Jassy about being better than those who hurt you." Miriam smiled. "Smart boy." She looked at Jassy. "What do you think, dear? It's your choice." Jassy rose, walking toward the elders. She was tiny compared to them, barely reaching their ankles. But when she exhaled her healing smoke, when she began to cure their plague with the very gift they'd scorned, they understood the magnitude of their mistake. Humanity, they realized, had seen value where dragons saw only weakness. A human grandmother had claimed a treasure they'd discarded as trash. And in doing so, she taught them all what true strength looked like.